welcome to be here with us today. My name is Saudamini Bagai. I work with the NDC LT-LEDs and Sectoral Support Unit of the Mitigation Division at the UNFCCC Secretariat, and I will be moderating this event today. Thank you so much for joining us here at this side event on accelerating NDC implementation in 2022, Support for Policy and Planning, which is being organized by the UNFCCC Secretariat and the NDC Partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the start of a critical decade for the acceleration and implementation of climate action. As informed by the latest IPCC report, implementation efforts need to be stepped up and scaled out now if we are to be on track for achieving the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. Indeed, one of the highlights of that report was the message that finance, policy frameworks, and technologies that can support the achievement of the Paris Agreement goals are available. However, to accelerate the transition at the magnitude and the speed required to meet these goals, it is critical to foster innovation and efficient approaches to connect country priorities and related support needs with targeted and equally ambitious expertise, finance, and technical assistance. This side event, accordingly, brings together countries and development partners in a conversation on priorities, experiences, support needs, and opportunities and challenges in the efforts towards the implementation of nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies. And we have an exciting and packed program planned for you today. We will hear opening remarks from the COP26 Presidency, followed by a brief scene-setting presentation detailing the outcomes of the Glasgow Pact with regard to NDCs and LT-LEDs. We will then take a deep dive into the experiences of parties and development partners on accelerating ambition and kickstarting implementation of NDCs through the development and implementation of policies to achieve these targets. Finally, bringing us to a conclusion, we will hear from the incoming COP27 Presidency on the importance of coordination and collaboration in the pursuit of enhanced ambition and implementation in the lead up to COP27 and beyond. So without further ado, allow me to welcome Eva Lagat for the opening remarks. Eva is the policy advisor for the UK government in the COP26 Presidency team, where she leads on NDCs and long-term strategies within the mitigation team. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today at this event, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what the panelists have to say in today's discussion. By the end of COP26, parties had really stepped up and submitted 124 new and updated NDCs, many of them enhanced, more robust, and ambitious, thanks to the hard work of governments and partners across the globe, and in many cases, to the support of organizations like the NDC Partnership. This was significant progress. But parties recognized in Glasgow that these NDCs were not enough collectively to keep the world on track to keep 1.5 within reach. The Glasgow Climate Pact, which all parties agreed to, requests parties to revisit and strengthen their NDCs as necessary to align with the Paris temperature goal by the end of this year. Not in 5 years' time, not in 2025, but this year in 2022. As COP presidency, the UK is continuing to work with partners to urge all parties to respond to that request, to revisit their NDCs, take another look at them, and explore if they can be further strengthened. And as the COP president himself has said on numerous occasions, major emitters need to lead from the front in ensuring that their 2030 targets are aligned with the Paris temperature goal. This is absolutely vital for closing the gap to 1.5. But every party has a role to play in honouring the promises made to turn pledges into action for the sake of our collective future. And it's been encouraging to see a number of NDCs submitted since COP26 and a growing number of parties signalling their intentions to revisit and strengthen their NDCs this year. COP President has also spoken about the UK's own work in this area. Colleagues of mine in London are working at this moment to consider our own response, exploring ways to strengthen our NDC and ensure our target remains Paris-aligned, as well as focusing on delivery. In the Glasgow Climate Pact, as I think we all know, parties also strengthened the request for long-term low emissions and development strategies, clearly recognising the importance of developing them to enable just transitions towards net zero, and emphasising that they should be informed by the latest available science, updated regularly, and aligned with NDCs. We've now seen a total of 51 long-term strategies submitted, if I'm not mistaken, with many others in the pipeline this year. We're urging all parties to submit outstanding NDCs, long-term strategies, or any updates to those in time for the UNFCCC synthesis report deadline of the 23rd of September. And as we look towards COP27, there's also a growing recognition that implementation of our commitments is absolutely essential. We need to show the world that NDC targets for 2030 are not just pledges or pieces of paper. They're underpinned by robust sectoral plans and policies and being translated into real-world action. But as we all know here, this is very challenging, and that's why we're here this afternoon, to learn from one another. With full implementation of NDCs and net zero targets too, we could be on track for around 2 degrees or below, as research has shown. But recent reports have also estimated that current targets for 2030 alone put us on track for warming of over 2 degrees, and current policies fall shorter still, putting us on track for warming of 2.7 to 3.2 degrees, according to different reports. So it's not just the ambition gap, but also the implementation gap that we need to address. As we know, the recent Working Group 3 report on mitigation reaffirmed the need for urgent action, as alluded to by Saudamini, and indeed the need for strengthened NDCs in response to the closing window for action to keep 1.5 alive. But the report also set out that climate action is most effective when integrating multiple policy areas and different levels of governance, and that innovative policy packages have already enabled the increasingly widespread adoption of low-cost renewables. There has been a consistent expansion of policies and laws supporting climate action over the last 8 years, and many regulatory and economic instruments have already been successfully deployed. In other words, implementation is already happening all around us. And the growth of cities, the falling costs of renewables and other green technologies, and sustainable land use all present huge opportunities for continued progress. As the COP President has made clear, it is also critical that developed countries work together to meet the 100 billion a year goal as soon as possible through implementing last year's delivery plan. And a continued scaling up of public support to developing countries will be an important part of how we finance the global transition. The IPCC is also clear that global investment in the trillions of dollars per year is required. And to finance this, we need to urgently align all financial flows with the Paris Agreement and improve the predictability, speed, and accessibility of climate finance for developing nations worldwide. The NDC Partnership and their newly launched finance strategy are part of the effort to ensure that finance is tailored to developing countries' needs and that countries can use their NDCs to mobilise finance and drive investments. The UK is very proud that COP President Alok Sharma serves as co-chair of the NDC Partnership alongside Minister Samuda of Jamaica. It's a fantastic organisation that allows parties to request the support they need to implement their ambitious NDCs, to make further enhancements, and to develop long-term strategies. The partnership has shown that by combining countries' leadership with a coordinated response from international partners, technical and financial support can be mobilised effectively. I understand that NDC Partnership are currently supporting 80 countries with the implementation of their NDCs, and that further support is available to other countries on application. Events and workshops like this one and others organised around the world by NDC Partnership and other partners and organisations provide really valuable opportunities for parties to share their experiences of developing policies and processes to effectively implement their commitments. This is really important to allow parties to learn from each other through the challenges of developing and implementing NDCs and long-term strategies. So I'm very much looking forward to today's panel discussion and to hearing the experiences of our esteemed colleagues from Uganda, Fiji, and Peru. I encourage everyone here today to continue to engage with fora such as this and with organisations like the NDC Partnership that provide such essential support for the enhancement and implementation of mitigation plans and policies, to turn ambition into action and help us keep 1.5 in reach. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eva, for your insightful remarks on what is possible, what is being done, and what remains to be achieved to meet our collective goals. I would now like to invite my colleague, Mr. Bernd Hackman, team lead of the NDC LT-led Sectoral Support Unit at the Mitigation Division of the UNFCCC Secretariat, to share with us some of the outcomes of the Glasgow Pact in relation to enhancing ambition and acceleration of implementation of NDCs, as well as those on the decisions on LT-leds. Over to you, Bernd.
Thank you very much, Saramini. And welcome everyone to Bonn. We are glad that finally we can have meetings like this again after such a long time, having similar meetings in Zoom. And I really enjoyed meeting many friends and colleagues already here who I actually forgot how they look like and only knew these faces on screen. So thank you very much for coming and thanks for being here with us today. Next slide, please. Eva already mentioned much of what I wanted to share with you today. So what you see here is how we went into the COP. It's the outcome of the NDC synthesis report, or one of the key figures of that report that we prepared prior to the Glasgow COP on the basis of all the NDCs that we have received by then. And the key messages you see in this figure are those that Eva already highlighted. One is the red area are the projections of where the NDCs would take us if fully implemented. The blue or green areas are those where we need to be, according to science. And this figure has been now even revised, coming with the new IPCC numbers. But in general, what is very clear is that we are very far away from where we want to be. It also shows, and Eva mentioned that the yellow line is an IPCC scenario that takes us to somewhere around 2.7 degrees Celsius increase. That doesn't mean that NDCs take us there, but we just plotted it in there to give a view of what is the scale of this exercise. Also, Eva mentioned that if all pledges that are currently on the table, including the existing long-term strategies, will take us to somewhere below, shortly below 2 degrees, also implies that all of that has to be fully implemented. And I think that is the key reason why we are here. We hear that a lot of ambition is there, that countries really are putting forward all they have, but we now also need to implement. And what we also see not so prominent in this figure, but it is also there in the data, is that we are not only facing an ambition gap, we are also facing an implementation gap. So that means that the implementation, although happening everywhere around the world, but is yet not catching up with the ambition we are setting ourselves. And I think those are key messages that highlight the importance of meetings like this, that highlight the importance of continue working, both in the negotiations with the presidencies, with all parties, but also everyone individually with their partners to move forward. And partners are really a broad spectrum of partners, from financial institutions to development partners, to bilateral partners, to think tanks, to universities, I think we need them all. And I'm glad many of them are here today. Next slide, please. So we heard a lot of what is the outcome of the COP. When remembering the figure before, that was how we went into the COP, and then parties at the COP decided we need to respond to that. And one common theme throughout the outcome of Glasgow was this sense of urgency. We need to do something, we need to do it now, and we need to do it fast. And that was, recognized by all countries that we actually have a problem. I think we have a problem summarizes everything that is on this slide, and that sets the tone for then the following parts of the decision that was adopted in Glasgow. Next slide, please. So we had elements on mitigation and mitigation ambition. And that is, Eva already mentioned, the call to everyone to look at the NDC and see, can we get better? Can we do something more? Is that possible? There was also then the call for everyone to develop long-term strategies. And, you mentioned it all, how they should look like, how, where it goes, and also especially how to link it with your NDC. Parties also agreed on establishing a work program on mitigation ambition and implementation, both of these elements, because we have two gaps to fill. And I'm very glad to report back to you. We started the negotiations here, and the sense of urgency was carried over from Glasgow into this session as well. Parties really want to work it out. And I think that's great, especially also with both presidencies here, handing from one to another. Let me report back to you, we are working in the middle between your two COPs to really get also this work program up and running. Another element that is very critical is, I think, the very last one. And that is that the element of justice and just transition is a key theme in this work. And I think that is something we certainly hear from others as well, but we can only move together, and we can move together only when this is just and fair for everyone, and everyone feels to be on board. Next slide, please. NDCs are not only about mitigation. I think all of you know that. And the figure we saw in the beginning is also not only pointing towards mitigation, it also shows we are in a warming world. So the Glasgow Pact highlights also the urgency to adapt to this new world and to scale up actions and support in that regard. There was also a work program launched to address exactly this. And also that adaptation actions are not standalone actions anymore. This needs to be integrated into planning because we are on a long-term trajectory and we need to take these challenges seriously. So not only the long-term planning or the integration of mitigation measures, but equally important also the integration of adaptation measures into actual planning exercises. And the last one on this slide, and I think that's very critical also for a panel like today, is that developed countries are to at least double adaptation finance, so that there is this recognition that we need to step up adaptation action, but we also need to step up the support on that. Next slide, please. And here we come to support in general. Eva mentioned the 100 billion goal that is out there. There was a very strong recognition that we haven't met this goal, and we need to, and parties are working towards that now. There's also the need to significantly increase financial support, and therefore, again, also a work program was launched to look into this. How can we do that? And so we have 3 work programs looking at these challenges that we are facing together. It is critical to make these financial flows that are existing all around the world now really bring those in alignment with the Paris Agreement and its objectives, because we need to kind of focus our activities in this regard if we want to address the challenges at hand. What is also critical to note is that capacity needs and gaps are really prevalent in many countries. For addressing these challenges, it is important that countries have the capacity to address it also on their own. And I think this is exactly also where partnerships come in to address these capacity building gaps. And there was a strong call for support for more capacity building so that countries are ready to implement their ambition and to put forward new ambition in the future. Next slide, please. So what does that actually mean? Here under the COP, we have several activities, and I'm only pointing out a few of them, but one is now the work program. There will also be a roundtable, a high-level roundtable happening in Sharm el-Sheikh on ambition. I think those are important moments. We have also the work program on finance, the work program on adaptation, and many other issues that are happening here. But we are also, Glasgow also came out with new requests to parties, and Eva actually mentioned all of them, but they're just here again. One is everyone to look at their NDC and see if there is scope to do more. The next one is to start looking, and we heard already there is many countries are doing that right now, looking into the long-term strategies. A challenging element is how do we align these strategies? That is a theme of integration, of how do we align rather short-term ambition and targets with a long-term development perspective. The strong call and focus for implementation. We cannot wait forever, and we heard already that implementation is happening everywhere, and that is a focus area. And then the idea of a transition to low energy systems, a transition to climate resilient economies, that is more and more critical. Eva mentioned the deadlines for submitting NDCs and long-term strategies to the Secretariat. That is 23rd of September. This is not a hard deadline to submit, but it is a deadline for those that want their NDC and their long-term strategy to be included in these synthesis reports that we will prepare both on long-term strategies and on NDCs for the upcoming COP, and on which basis we have prepared last time the figure you saw in the beginning. I think this sums up what happened at the COP. It's actually a call for action, and it's a call for working together. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Soudamini.
Thank you so much, Bernd, for that presentation on sharing the backgrounds and outcomes from Glasgow. I think the key word, again, as we all heard, is implementation, is turning ambition into action. So we are really looking forward to this panel, and the presentation really set us up very well for this discussion. We're bringing together parties and development partners to discuss the experience, opportunities, and good practices in the process of NDC implementation and the coordination of support for these efforts. With that, I'm happy to introduce our moderator for the panel, Estefania Ardila, Deputy Director of Country Engagement at the NDC Partnership Support Unit. Estefania will be guiding us through this panel discussion. So over to you, Estefania.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Soudamini colleagues. It's a great pleasure to be here and an honor to be sharing in this conversation with countries and with partners that have collaborated deeply and have been very much engaged within the framework of the NDC Partnership and beyond. Let me start by introducing our panelists. We have with us today Margaret Atieno-Mwebesa, Commissioner Climate Change from the Ministry of Water and Environment and UNFCCC National Focal Point of Uganda. Welcome, Margaret. We have also Milagros Sandoval, Directora General de Cambio Climático y de Certificación at the Ministry of Environment of Peru. We have with us Kushal Raj, Acting Head of Climate Change and International Cooperation from the Ministry of Economy from Fiji. And from the partners, we have Catherine Diamvala, Global Climate Change Technical Specialist from UNDP Climate Promise, Daniel Pluge, Support Project for the Implementation of the Paris Agreement from GIZ, and finally, Dr. Sina, Climate Advisor from the World Bank. So, if you may, please join us at the stage. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'll just take the presentation from my colleague Bernd as a start and highlight that concept and that need of urgent ambition and action. And I'd like to start with a first question for the countries. And let me start for you, Margaret. What steps has Uganda taken towards the acceleration of ambition and on the implementation of your NDC targets in terms of plans, policies that have been put in place to address that ambition? And what have you learned from that process?
Thank you so much for that question. As the previous speakers mentioned and said, climate change is real, and countries really need to accelerate their ambition. In fact, according to the IPCC, the sixth report, the gap is reducing rapidly for opportunities to enable climate resilient development. So for us as a country, we've jumped onto the bandwagon. We are increasing our ambition to ensure that we reduce emissions. So the country, Uganda, we have updated our NDC, and it's quite ambitious, with emission reduction up to 24.7% from 22.7%. As a country, we have suffered a lot of climatic hazards, so we thought it's really necessary for us to step up our ambitions. As a country, we've also gone ahead and brought on board a number of other sectors. Under our NDC1, we had only 13 sectors that were assessed for this emission reduction. Under the new updated NDC, we have over 13 sectors, the key impact sectors. And to us, I think that's a huge step. Reason being, we've gotten the opportunity, we have more information about the sectors, their emission reduction reference levels, and so we were able to carry out more modeling for these sectors. So we are looking into 13 sectors when it comes to reduction of these emissions. As I said, our target is to have 24.7% reduction by 2030, below business as usual, with an economy-wide sector approach. We are saying that part of this should be contribution from our own government, that is to the level of about 5.9%. And the other 18 point something should come from our development partners. This is really to ensure that our country is also committed to reducing degradation of the environment and all that. So we are committed as a country, and the country is committed to also contribute towards reduction of these emissions. Another very important process that the country has gone through, we've prepared updated our NDC together with our long-term strategy. This is a long-term climate action parallel together, so that both processes have enjoyed information, sharing of data, modeling together. So to us as a country, I think that was a very big process. I mean, lesson that we've learned as a country. Yet, I think for now, this is what I can say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I think that last point of integrating the long-term strategies and NDC processes is absolutely fundamental. And I'd like to continue with Milagros, because I believe that there have been similar experiences in that sense of integration in Peru. So Milagros, can you reflect a bit on the steps for ambition in Peru, and also the learnings or key learnings in that process?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation and bringing in countries to present what we are doing. And I think it's important also to highlight what was mentioned before in the presentations, that we're right now working on ambition, and ambition definitely is very linked to implementation. And how do we address these issues at the national and subnational levels? So for Peru, as many of you may know, we raised our ambition. Our NDC was first on 30%, and in 2020 we raised our ambition to reducing emissions to 40%. So this obviously implies, how do we land this percentage, these numbers on the ground? So this is part of what we're addressing right now, and a part of this process and strengthen the institutionality and the governance of this process is important, so that this is linked and has sustainability in the medium and long term. So part of this process has included working on strengthening and clarifying our policy framework. And for that, we enacted our climate change law and our regulations. First, the law was enacted in 2018, and specific regulations in 2019. So our legislation is quite new, and we are just in the process of implementing. Obviously, the implementation caught us with the pandemic, but this has not stopped us, and we have been moving this in this process forward. And the importance of the policy framework is that we have identified and established and clarified the roles, not only at the national level. For example, the Ministry of Environment is the national authority, but it also grants specific roles to the sectors, the specific sectors which Margaret was also mentioning, that are the ones that need to address these issues because of the emissions related to these sectors. But definitely it is important to also highlight the role of the subnational governments in this process, and that has also been reflected in our legislation. The NDCs in countries like Peru, in developing countries, have to land in a territorial approach, have to land in specific areas. So this is what helps us, this framework helps us to support this process. Also, another important key step that we have done is to try to strengthen the governance. How do we strengthen governance? Well, giving a voice to different stakeholders, and that this is not only this is not a process just led by the Ministry of Environment or by the government. It has to be led by different stakeholders, especially civil society, indigenous peoples that do have a role in this process. How have we done it? We have 3 specific platforms or spaces where we discuss with different stakeholders. One is the high-level National Commission on Climate Change, where we have 14 ministers discussing, ministries and the ministers and their deputy ministers discussing how we're going to engage with the NDC. They support and they address the update and establishing new measures for the NDC. And we also have our National Climate Change Commission, where there's civil society, and we include, for example, women's organization, we include young citizens, even children that have to be part of this process and have to be given, and we have to hear their voices. And obviously, and last but not least, we have an Indigenous Peoples platform that is the reflection of the platform that has been approved here at the international level. So those are the three main spaces of governance we have, and also part of the process of the policy framework that grants the Minister of Environment the role of giving technical assistance to these different spaces and these different platforms. So that is part of what we are addressing right now in the country. Some of the lessons learned, I think I would like to just highlight three. Especially one is related to the participatory processes. Countries such as Peru that are multi-diverse, multicultural, need to have and strengthen participatory processes. We have been working on an ad hoc methodology to include and hear the voices of different stakeholders in this process. Also, we need, as mentioned by Margaret, to link our NDC with our long-term strategy. Currently, we are updating our long-term strategy. It is our national strategy for climate change, which hopefully will be updated before the end of the year, and which includes not only mitigation, but also adaptation. The NAP is part of the input. And definitely another document, a strategy we're working, because this also has to be linked, is our climate finance strategy. These two documents have to be included and embedded under our national, under our NDC. And last but not least, I think it is also important to identify how different initiatives that are now being implemented in the country by civil society, by different actors, by donors, link to this process. There are ongoing initiatives that have to be linked, and that's why we need to strengthen our monitoring systems related to this process so that we can really reflect how different stakeholders are engaging in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Milagros, for that very insightful intervention. Let me pick your last point on coordination, making sure that we have everything mapped, that all the initiatives are being taken into account, to open up the discussion also to the partners that are here with us, and turn to the issue of coordination and implementing and raising ambition for NDCs, developing LTS together. So the question here is, in terms of engagement, coordination between the countries, the parties, and the development partners, what have been some good practices, and also the challenges in terms of identifying those needs for support required from the countries, and what has been learned from the process. And let me start with you, Catherine, for that question.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hold. Yeah, I think it works. Thank you so much, Estefania, and thank you for having me here. Thank you for having UNDP on this panel. Nice to share the stage with two countries that we work very closely with, Peru and Uganda. Just to give you a bit of context of UNDP is big, of course, but the initiative that I work for and that contributes the most to the NDC is the Climate Promise, which I hope you have heard of. It's the largest offer on NDC support. We supported 120 countries submit their NDCs, enhance their NDCs, and as you recently heard, 124 submitted their NDC, and 99 of them were supported by the Climate Promise. So that was the first phase of the Climate Promise, which started in 2019. We are now entering the second phase. We started the second phase this year, and we are focusing on NDC implementation, of course. And we are looking at scaling up ambition and implementation, and this is where we support countries on strengthening the governance structure, having the financing strategies, the implementation plan, so all the policy work that they need to advance their NDC. We are also supporting LTS and also the inclusive process. So inclusivity not meaning just engaging, talking to the youth, private sector, so all these stakeholders that may have been involved in the revision process, but making sure that they also have a voice in the implementation process and they stay on throughout the implementation process. So this is just a bit of a background on the climate promise. But to answer your question, good practices for identifying needs. So when we started the climate promise, when we frame our support on NDC revision, we based it on surveys that we conducted with over 100 country offices and government on what their need would be to revise their NDC. So that informed the way we structured the service. It was about modeling, scenario modeling. It was about whole of government approach. It was about including the youth. It was about looking at new sectors and understanding the data and revising the data. So that's the support we provided. In the second phase of the climate promise, as I said, we have 120 countries, and those countries submit a report every quarter. As you know, everybody has to report. And when they were wrapping up their first phase, we asked them, what do you think your priorities will be on implementation? And they responded to that. And we also had another survey. And that was the basis for the second phase, for structuring the second phase of the climate promise. So we are now supporting about 50 countries. We intend to support all 120. But the requests we're getting are on a lot about strengthening their ability to attract finance. So once a country gets support from us also, there is another level of consultation that happens at the country level to identify the priorities that will go in the work plan of that country. So that's I would say that's the best, a good practice for responding to country needs. And of course, we work very closely with the NDC Partnership and all the requests and the partnership plan that come from that process that we also look at to be able to respond to countries. So I think I answered, but I don't know whether you said something about the challenges. I could speak to the challenges as well. Well, I would say I'm pretty sure everybody will agree here that the challenge is usually that there is never enough money for all the needs that the countries have, or sometime the type of funding that we have doesn't respond to the need. So we are hearing a lot from countries that policy is great, governance structure is great, but really what we need is implementation. We need projects. We need funds for projects. And that's not the type of funding that we always provide. So I think maybe the World Bank can say more about that. The Development Bank can probably answer those requests. And of course, the climate finance funds can answer those requests more appropriately than the type of financing that we bring to the table. So I will stop there for now. Thank you, Estefania.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Indeed, I think that's also part of the ambition that needs to be raised, the volumes as well as the different types of finance that are brought to countries so they can move ahead and implement their commitments. So let me turn very quickly to you, Milagros, maybe to reflect on those points that have been laid out by Catherine. And from your perspective, from the country perspective, how has that coordination process worked? And probably if you find any comment or addition into the challenges.
Thank you. I think that these issues related to climate change are bringing us together in a learning by doing process, because these are really things that are new to every country. that imply challenges not only at the policy level, but also obviously at the implementation level. So having support of partners that can bring in technical support, for example, that is definitely important. And I think that's what we have been, in the case of Peru, we have been very lucky to have implementing partners that are supporting us through not only support related to finance, to support all of this, but also support in the technical issues. And that, I think, is very important because you need that support, that backup, because this is something that also many countries are facing. We do not necessarily know how to move forward, so lessons learned through South-South cooperation, through understanding what are the needs, what is the support needed, or if countries have made progress, and this can also reflect in the way that we are moving forward, is definitely important. Also, something to address is the need of flexibility and fast answers, fast response. The flexibility of the funding is necessary because, again, we are learning by doing. So maybe we put a specific plan, and in the middle of the plan, in implementing something, we realize that there's a need to make some changes, some adjustments. So the flexibility is definitely important. And I think also there are obviously various challenges, and specifically challenges are related to how do we land the NDC measures. Because we have this goal, but the goal is not enough. We need to work with each one of the sectors to identify how we implement, how do we establish those measures. And that is part probably of what was mentioned related to the projects. But obviously, what we need is to establish the enabling conditions, and I think that is what we are working, and it's part of the challenges to establish those enabling conditions, as well as I mentioned previously, the participatory process are definitely a challenge, and part of the flexibility of the funding and supporting those participatory process that have to be effective, that have to involve different stakeholders are important as well. And I think that this, what was mentioned as well about the ability to attract finance. I believe that as countries, we need to identify first the policy part, the governance part, and that having clear roadmaps of what do we want and how we're going to reach those goals and how we're going to reach that NDC can also support that the process of attracting the necessary funds that are needed, not only from the government sector for public funds, but that obviously have to be reflected, have to be linked to this climate process, but also a private sector that is definitely quite important to identify and to see what are the challenges related to this process and how can this be supported, as well as obviously international cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is a very interesting point that you raise on private sector, non-state actor engagement. And on that point, I'd like to invite Dr. Chandrasena from the World Bank, institution with broad sectoral experience, to provide his reflections on the good practices for that collaboration between countries and partners, and also the lessons learned along the way.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to join the panel. And it's a pleasure to be here and share some of the experiences and certainly learn from many others who have been implementing the implementation of the NDCs. For us, the biggest learning over the last year, and in particular through the participation in the NDC processes, has been the integration of climate change as a broader part of our dialogue with the countries and formulating the implementation of these NDCs and integrating the NDCs in national planning and implementation process. The World Bank operates with every country through what is called the Country Partnership Framework, which is typically a 5-year process of deciding what the programs that would be supported, what kind of investments would be made. And the Country Partnership Framework is informed by core country diagnostics. And these are integrated into what we call the systemic country diagnostic. And the core diagnostics for us have been on growth and in poverty, and as of last year, on country, climate, and development report. So after 20 years, we've added a diagnostic to our core dialogue process with countries to make an assessment of what the implication of climate change will be on growth, on poverty, as a fundamental pillar for deciding on how the World Bank certainly and will engage with the clients, and we expect that this will inform the broader engagement of countries in terms of its development trajectory, in terms of the way it will address climate change, the way it will address poverty, and a whole range of other things. And in 1 year, in just 1 year, where we had to start from scratch, building on the experiences from a lot of initiatives like the NDC Partnership, the work that is being done by the broader set of stakeholders, to define a whole new diagnostic and implement it in 35 countries in the first year itself. And by July this year, we expect to come out with these country diagnostics, the country climate and development reports, which then will get integrated into the work that is done under the country economic memorandum, which looks at growth, which will look at poverty assessment, which analyzes the impact of growth on poverty and now climate change on poverty, and defines the program for engagement of the World Bank, which typically will put in about $60 billion of new commitment in developing countries every year, of which we have a commitment to have climate-related finance of at least 35%. That's about $20 to $25 billion a year. Most of it would be fully aligned with the NDC, and as we go forward and as countries gain more experience, these would be fully aligned with the NDCs, because there's a process by which defining your NDCs aligned with your development plans, aligned with your growth trajectory, aligned with your strategy to address poverty, has to come together. And the whole global community is trying to understand how to make this happen effectively, in a coordinated manner among different ministries, in a coordinated manner among all development partners. And this has all been something that we have been trying to address over the last couple of decades, but has accelerated tremendously in the last year. That's one of our key learning experience. And the first CCDR, the first set of country climate and diagnostic reports, included China, included Turkey, included Brazil, included South Africa, all of the big countries, and the next ones will include India and 30 other countries, which would mean that we'd cover most of the countries within a 3-year time horizon. That's the idea. And this is not a one-off exercise. The core diagnostics that the World Bank carries out is done prior to every systemic country diagnostic and informs every country partnership framework that we'll do from now on. So this is going to be an ongoing effort to look at long-term strategies, net zero strategies, try to work backwards to see what the implication is in the NDC time horizon, and then try to see what are the implications for the engagement of the World Bank as far as the investments are concerned. And these engagements are in the form of a package of policies that are necessary for the implementation of the framework, the country partnership framework, a package of investments that will go through what we call the IPF, our investment lending program, and our P4R, the payment for result, outcome-based engagement in countries. So effectively, what has happened through the process, of which NDC partnership is a big part, is that at least as far as the World Bank is concerned, climate change and planning for implementation of the NDCs now has become a core part of the consideration around economic growth, poverty, and finding ways of making sure that this is resilient to the impacts of climate change and goes towards addressing the risk of climate change through appropriate mitigation measures. So the learning for us has been quite dramatic in terms of trying to integrate what often started off in a particular line ministry into all the relevant ministries which need to be involved in making decision on taking this forward, and working with a whole set of stakeholders and development partners to make sure that there's a coherent message in terms of what needs to be done. So we look forward to continuing to learn from our clients and certainly our development partners, other development partners, other stakeholders to see how we can do it better, because there's always a room to do it more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha, for those very interesting perspectives on mainstreaming NDCs and climate into the bank's operations and the support that's provided. Let me close the interventions by the partners by turning to you, Daniel. Could you offer, from your experience, from your work with the countries, your perspectives from GIZ on coordination, the good practices, and also one key learning from that process?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for having us on this panel with so many esteemed colleagues. I think, when it comes to the process, we just conducted an internal study on what actually makes a good project, or what brings good implementation of projects to be successful, effective, and with a lasting impact. And maybe I share some insights on that. And that is it's necessary that before a project starts, and that mirrors a bit the UNDP approach, that there's a mutual exchange with all relevant stakeholders, and that we really analyze the gaps and needs from the national to the local level, and that we don't step into this implementation with predefined goals, with from the onset knowing what and how we would achieve what we want to achieve. And that means that that's in the best sense is conceptualized as a joint continuous learning process, which is not only in the planning phase but throughout the whole implementation phase. And that also mirrors what the colleague from Peru said, that adaptations of the project or of the implementation needs to be done while it is happening, because priorities may change, needs may change, and new issues may come up that just need to be considered. And very important is to really be inclusive in this process, to also include women, youth, indigenous people, local communities, and to really give them the opportunity to voice their needs and concerns. And by that, I mean that for them, some of them, it's really important to have a safe space to speak up. They are probably not likely to speak up in front of a big auditorium or something. You have to create a space for them to understand their needs, to really get them into talking, so to say, to see what their needs are. And by that, you can, when it comes to implementation, really create ownership. And that is, I think, a very important part as well, that you have ownership, and you directly, when ownership comes into play, stakeholders take over responsibilities. Stakeholder will give in their own experiences and their own resources, and the uptake of targeted capacity development actions is much better than if you have this ownership, because people understand that it's all for the better of the whole NDC implementation. And we also have to bear in mind that sometimes we have to step away from this needs analysis in form of a structured needs analysis workshop somewhere in a hotel room, but that we rather have to use approaches, for example, like storytelling approaches or drawing. When I was still a researcher, we did that with local communities in Madagascar. That we just put a piece of large paper on the floor, and they should draw their ideal landscape they want to live in. And we started then from that, translating that into activities that would need to be done. So you have to be culturally sensitive and really closely collaborate, especially with the local partners. And in the end, to me, when it comes to learning, it all boils down a bit to the issue of trust. You have to build trust with the partners to have an effective implementation, to enable an effective implementation, especially when it comes to very complex problems like climate change that need a long-term commitment from donors, from development partners, but also from the in-country partners. So that is one of the main learnings. And entities like, the initiatives like the NDC Partnership or the GIZ, or also UNDP, we have long-standing partnerships. You have the in-country facilitators. GIZ has in-country offices in so many countries since decades in some of the countries, or regional offices. So trust is there. But as the colleague from Peru said, in the end, it's about local implementation, and there you oftentimes, you meet new stakeholders and you have to build new trust. So yes, we have to accelerate NDC implementation, but we don't have to forget about this trust-building process.
Thank you very much. I think it's a great point on trust. Let me close this segment with you, Margaret. Could you provide any closing remarks on this issue of good practice, lessons learned for identifying your priorities in Uganda and coordinating with partners for their implementation and their support?
Thank you so much. I also want, I think I should have done this at the beginning. I want to thank UNDP for the support, the UNDP Climate Promise for the support, because it has enabled us to really work on our updating our NDC and also the LTS. And also the NDC Partnership. We are working very closely with the NDC Partnership, and we are getting quite a bit of support, and we really appreciate that. Technical assistance from the NDC Partnership, and we are really moving forward. I also want to say that in Uganda we have coordination, some coordination structures. When it comes to we have the Environment and Climate Change Development Partners Group, where ministries and departments are called regularly. They have monthly meetings to present their needs. So we've really benefited a lot from this platform, and we are getting a number of development partners registering interest in supporting us. We also have a program working group. It's very multi-sectoral, also including development partners, where we do regular assessment, reviews of where we are and what the demand or the demand is when it comes to the different sectors, including climate change. So to us, that is a very good platform too, where we really mobilize and try to mobilize resources and also air our challenges. So to me, I think that's a very good one. We also, as Ministry of Water and Environment, and especially the Climate Change Department, one of our mandates is to mobilize climate financing together with Ministry of Finance. So we do a number of meetings, joint meetings together. And also under the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development of Uganda, we are creating a climate change unit. And basically it is also to mobilize resources for climate actions. So to me, I think Uganda really desires to overcome this financial constraint. We've come up with a very ambitious NDC, And one of our constraints definitely will be resources to implement this NDC. And we are really committed as a country to put in some resources, but definitely I know from the government coffers it will not be sufficient. So we really need to have that cooperative international cooperation with the different development partners and look at how we can really implement this NDC. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. On that point, let us turn to the partners and to the task at hand. There is a gap, there is an urgent need to increase ambition and to translate that ambition into action. So I'm going to be asking you about the specific support opportunities that are available to the countries and how to access them in the lead up to COP27 and also beyond, and in alignment with the Glasgow Climate Pact and of course with the Paris Agreement. So what are these opportunities out there when thinking of NDCs enhancement, LT-led submission preparation, and what can countries do to access this support? And let me start with you, Daniel, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So, yeah, I think the NDC update process, the recent one, has shown that really the big issue is implementation. And so what GIZ can offer, or development partners in general can offer, is through the country offices and through the long-standing relationship with governments in our partner countries, that we help in designing NDC implementation plans, that we help then also in developing funding strategies, and for funding, and that is something that I want really to emphasize. Data is a very important point. You need to somehow prove to donors that what you are suggesting in a proposal that really can be achieved, and for that you need data. So this data thing comes in, and we are also helping with setting up data systems, MRV systems, and also on the enhanced transparency framework. So. And GIZ, as you know, is a member to several partnerships, such as the NDC Partnership, and we are also hosting partnerships like the partnership on transparency and the Paris Agreement, which I'm heading, or just until recently the Let's Global Partnership. And these multi-actor partnerships enable a matchmaking between the needs and the potential support offers. And just as an example for the PATPA, what we are having is a so-called climate help desk, and that is a very country-driven approach with a very low-key concept node that countries can fill in and tell us what are their urgent needs that with a short-term intervention can be solved, and on NDCs, on LTS, and on MRV issues, and that is an instrument which is very well taken up, and that is one example for bilateral cooperation processes that GIZ is carrying out. And the key to this really is we have to keep in mind the alignment, of the strategies, of the objectives, and of the resources that are there, to really kind of try to enable holistic climate action portfolios, and to minimize the trade-offs and to maximize the synergies. And that also goes in the direction of the joint NDC and LTS implementation, and also the process of developing them, especially also in the view of the long-term strategies and the national adaptation plans. And you could even go further and beyond if you look in the realms of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Once they finalize the global biodiversity framework, there will be new national biodiversity strategies and actions plans coming up. So they should also somehow be, part of this whole system, as we are understanding that the climate and the biodiversity crisis are completely interlinked. And with all of these issues, GIZ is ready in the partner countries to help and to support.
Thank you, Daniel. Catherine, let's continue with you, please.
That's the question I get all the time. like what support is available for countries, especially since we supported 120 in the first phase. As I said, they submitted their NDC, and now the question is, so now what? How can you support implementation? So we started the second phase, and the second phase is structured a bit differently from the first phase. In the first phase, we were able to mobilize a lot of money and distribute it evenly among the 120 countries because the demand was very straightforward. It was revision, and it didn't require a lot of resources. Implementation requires a lot of resources. So the second phase, we are rolling out our support in waves. So as we mobilize funds, and we have been really lucky that we've mobilized funds from Germany, from Sweden, from Iceland, from the UK, and so on. So as we mobilize them, we allocate them to the countries. And our goal, of course, is to reach the 120 countries, but right now we are at 50 countries. So we are supporting a lot of things with these 50 countries, as I mentioned, NDC implementation plan, financing strategy, Article 6 readiness, just transition, you name it. So what the countries need to advance their implementation, we are supporting. But UNDP is, well, Climate Promise is just a small part of UNDP. We have a huge climate portfolio. And what we sometimes tell countries is we can help countries access GEF funds, GCF funds. They should be looking into that as well. It's a larger amount of money that they can put towards implementation. But beside that direct financial support, when you are part of the Climate Promise, you are part of a community. So we have lots of knowledge product. We have guidance on gender. We have guidance on green recovery, just transition. All the I would say the soft support that countries can access to help them in their implementation. So right now that's what we have. You know, I wish I could say we have a lot of money. Just knock on our door and we'll provide the support, but that's definitely not the case right now. And if there are any donors out there, the word is out. We are still mobilizing funding, and we would love for you to join the Climate Promise. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, for your very concise response. Let's turn, last but not least, to Dr. Sina from the World Bank.
Thanks again. I would reiterate that our core support for engagement on the climate agenda is through our country climate and diagnostic report. As I indicated, it's a core diagnostic, will be carried out for every country. It will be integrated in the, the diagnostic on economic growth and on our diagnostic on poverty assessment, and put together in the form of systemic country diagnostic and the country partnership framework. This is an ongoing, regular process for engagement, and we recognize that there would be need for supplemental support through other means for other purposes. For instance, we have the Climate Support Facility, which provides support through, again, the World Bank country offices and teams on additional issues that may need consideration. For instance, we have a whole of economy approach to addressing climate change, consistent with our direction of travel of recognizing that climate change cannot be dealt with in isolation to other ways in which countries need to respond through making appropriate plans, investments, build capacity. So there's the Climate Support Facility for that broader support. Then we have a whole new product line around result-based finance or use of markets. How do you mobilize private sector capital through what we call the Partnership for Market Implementation? That's a carryover from the Partnership for Market Readiness, which was a decade-long program through which about 30 countries planned their participation through Article 6. Partnership for Market Implementation goes further by looking at a whole new category of result-based financing, which facilitates the implementation by countries, including carbon pricing. We have additional sources of financing available to convert that plans around result-based financing into actual result-based payments through the climate emission reduction facility, for which, again, like Catherine, we are out to raise money. So, there are a whole range of products. I think the important element of this is that the World Bank engages systematically through the Ministry of Finance and the concerned line ministries in order to plan the transitions that are necessary for climate change in a systematic manner, and identify the financing need and mobilize private sector capital, mobilize donor finance, mobilize concessional finance in order to achieve the objectives that the country need. Our overall operating principle is not on an ad hoc basis, so we don't really have resources for efforts here and there, but it's all a part of a systematic way for us to engage with our clients, the line ministries, through our development partners, through other stakeholders, in order to go forward with identifying policies that are needed for the transition, identifying ways to implement that policy through our development policy lending, and identifying ways by which these are financed partially through the World Bank's investment programs, and more importantly, through creating enabling environment that allows private sector capital to also flow for the massive challenge that lies ahead of most of our client countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. I'm going to check with our event moderator to see if we have time for questions from the audience. Okay, a couple of questions from the audience we can take now. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Lindsay Skog. I'm with the Karuna Foundation based in the US. Thank you for a wonderful panel. This was delightful, and I appreciated all of your insights. My question is if any of you could share your thoughts on the most effective role for the philanthropic sector in implementation of NDCs, aside from the obvious of just flat grant making for projects, but if you have any specific examples of effective partnerships with private philanthropic organizations, I would be interested to hear some of that.
Sure. Dr. Sinha, please.
Let me start with an example. Some of you who've been following innovative finance may have heard of the Rhino Bond. The Rhino Bond was issued a couple of months ago, maybe 6-7 weeks ago, where there was an effort to mobilize finance through GEF to take on the risk of stepping down or lowering the rate of borrowing by the national parks in South Africa for overachieving their impact on protecting rhinos. It was a great example of leverage where some in the private sector, the green bond sector, were willing to take the risk of lowering the rate at which the Park Service was able to borrow in order to achieve great climate impact. I think one of the ways by which the philanthropic sector could potentially greatly improve adaptation finance, if you will, where there is limited interest by the private sector, even the ESG private sector finance, capital market finance, to achieve impacts of resilience using indicators such as the ones that the World Bank resilience indicators have been developed or others are working on, well-defined indicators through which the philanthropic sector is willing to step in beyond where the multilaterals go, beyond where bilateral donors go, in order to find really transformative impacts in the adaptation field and provide that additional incentive of lowering the rate of concessional finance. And I'll be happy to discuss with you specific ways in which that could be done, but that's one example that I can provide.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the next question. Monica, over.
I wanted to answer that question as well, if I may.
Perfect.
And this is not within UNDP, but back in the days before I joined UNDP, I had the opportunity to work for this NGO that was actually seed funded by philanthropy. And they were testing the case that if you provide financing to the private sector in developing countries that provide access to energy, it would work. It will increase your access to energy will be much higher than if you just gave a grant directly for access to energy. And it did work. So it's very similar to what my colleague from the World Bank was saying, is that risk that the private sector cannot take, philanthropy can take. And if you lower that risk and show that the market exists and just show the private sector it's safe to come in, I think that's where you will have the best result than just straightforward grant making. Thank you.
Thank you. Adding up to what the colleagues have mentioned, I think that, and also previously I come also from NGOs. I think that one issue that we have identified in the government normally, and that philanthropic organization support, is also the process of participation, especially, for example, in the case of indigenous peoples. And that is something that I think is very relevant, because we need to give a voice to different actors. So it's definitely important to engage through those through different stakeholders. Thanks.
Yeah. Can I ask some question? Okay, thank you. My name is Arun Bhatta, and I'm party delegate from Government of Nepal. So I want to share some experience regarding NDC preparation in Nepal. So we submitted our NDC in December 2020, in which we have clearly outlined that the country needs $25 billion as an international climate finance, which is outlined as a conditional money required. So this is equivalent to, Nepal's yearly budget is around $14 billion. So we need nearly 2 times of our budget until 2030. So one of the limiting factor would be climate finance. And I want to share some examples that there are instances where government of Nepal have received the support from multilateral banks, which doesn't fit Nepal's requirement. So this was the case with one of the projects that was meant for Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. We received this project as a technical assistance. So whereas Nepal priority is for the implementation of those NDC targets. So, and there is another example. We were in the midway to the NAP project completing, but after the second installment, we didn't receive the third installment. So since last 6 months, our NAP works have been hampered. So finance is the crucial factor, but also the governance part and the administrative part is also equally important. And I request to financial institutions to allocate the money that serves the best purpose of the government. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any reactions from the table, from the panel? Okay, good. Fabulous. That takes us to the end. Unfortunately, we are a bit over time, so we cannot take any more questions, but please feel free to submit those in writing, and we will do our very best to answer them. With that, Saudamini, floor is yours. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Estefania, and many thanks to our esteemed panelists who came here to Bond to share these wonderful stories and have shared these great experiences. And I'm sure the audience had an enriching time. Just with that, a big round of applause for all our panelists. If I may, could I request you to take your seats in the front of the room? And with that, I would like to welcome, to close this session, Amir Abdelaziz. Amir is the advisor to the Egyptian Minister of Environment on climate change issues. He is a member of the Egyptian COP27 Presidency team, where he leads the mitigation and transparency teams. Amir, please.
Thank you, Sudanami. Good afternoon, all. First, I would like to thank very much the organizers, the UNFCCC, the NDC Partnership, for inviting me to this important event. As a representative of the incoming COP presidency, I would like to thank all the distinguished panelists for the rich and valuable contribution to this event. We are all well aware of the science, or of what the science is telling us with respect to the dire need of increasing our ambition and implementation of mitigation actions on the ground to keep the temperature within safe limits for our future generations. And let me share some numbers or some facts which can be taken forward with us from this event, and which would remind us of the importance of this event and of what we're doing here. The IPCC Working Group 3 highlighted, the Working Group 3 report highlighted the following: the remaining carbon budget for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade is around 500 gigatons, while that for limiting the warming to 2 degrees is around 1,100 gigatons. The net anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions have increased since 2010 across all major sectors globally. And the global greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 associated with the implementation of the NDCs announced prior to COP26 would make it likely that warming will exceed 1.5 degrees during the 21st century, and this is what Bernd showed us in his presentation. One very important issue is that the average annual modeled investment required between 2020 to 2030 in the scenarios that limit the warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees are a factor of 3 to 6 than the current levels. And the total investments required from all sources, the public, private, domestic, and international, would need to increase across all sectors and all regions. So what does this tell us? This tells us that we really do not have much time left, and that there is an urgent need of doing more for the delivery on mitigation elements of the Glasgow Climate Pact and implement the commitments under the Paris Agreement. Also recognizing that such efforts cannot be implemented without the adequate finance needed for such implementation. The mitigation efforts currently are facing many challenges, including the COVID pandemic, including the geopolitical situation that we are facing. However, we need to keep driving the agenda on mitigation this year and years to come, since the impacts of climate change will not wait until such circumstances and problems to be solved. We have listened to interesting exchange of experiences on successful cases where countries were able to prepare for the implementation of their NDCs despite of the challenges. There are also barriers and obstacles that we have listened to, but we have heard how Uganda, for example, have increased their ambition despite of these challenges, and we really commend Uganda for that. We also heard very interesting experiences from Peru. They also increased their ambition despite of the challenges, and they are currently working on strengthening and clarifying their climate policies, regulations, and governance, which is really remarkable. We take this opportunity to urge all parties to start providing the enabling environment and appropriate policies which allows for the implementation of their NDCs, and also to work with all possible partners to identify the required finance for implementation of their NDCs. Let me give some examples from Egypt. We immediately started, after submitting our NDC, to reform some of our existing policies, and we also adopted new policies to allow for the enabling environment for implementation. For example, we are currently implementing a fossil fuel subsidy and electricity removal program, which is showing really significant impact on the ground and which impacted our emissions. We have also issued policies to promote the expansion of renewable energy development, which resulted in the implementation of one of the largest PV power plants in our region with a capacity of around 1.5 gigawatts. As we speak, Egypt is updating its NDC, and we are currently in the final approval process from the government, and hopefully we will announce our updated NDC this month. We are also well aware that support is the main factor which allows implementation of parties' NDCs, and therefore we take this opportunity to stress that the need to increase the levels of support at the required scale, which allows developing countries to implement their current NDCs and also allow them to increase their ambition. Finally, we will keep reminding parties about the decision that requests them to strengthen their 2030 targets and their NDC, and the decision which urges parties which have not submitted updated NDCs to do so as soon as possible before the deadline of September 23rd to allow the Secretariat to prepare the synthesis report. I would like to thank all of you again for attending and looking forward to supporting all parties for achieving a successful outcome in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. We are committed that we will spare no effort to come to an outcome which is balanced, which is satisfactory to all parties, and which will enable us to move forward with the efforts on mitigation and the overall climate agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And I know we've gone a little bit over time, but this session has been recorded, and it will be available on the UN Climate Change YouTube channel. We hope to continue the conversations that have started here today. If you would like to reach out to us, please feel free to email on the address